Long ago, the citizens of the Kharidian Desert lived luxurious and prosperous lives, guided by the gods of the Menethite pantheon. But all that changed when Amascut, the Goddess of Rebirth, was corrupted and warped, becoming the Devourer. Since then, she's had only one goal: to devour every soul in existence. Amascut's brother, Icflarin, along with her former high priestesses, fought tirelessly against her, but eventually she found a way to overcome them. Deep within the desert lies an ancient tomb. In this tomb, there is a great power, and if Amascut can gain it, she'll become unstoppable. You must take the fight to Amascut before it's too late, in Old School's third raiding dungeon, the Tombs of Amascut. Gather your allies and enter the tombs in groups of up to 8. Take on the 4 initial challenges, and if you overcome them, you'll be able to access the lower level. There, you'll face 2 of your greatest foes yet. Defeat these 2 final bosses and drive Amascut out of the tombs. And of course, claim plenty of loot as well.
With Tombs of Amascut, we're introducing a new system called Invocations. Invocations is a progressive and linear difficulty system. Unlike Theatre of Blood and Chambers of Xeric, where you simply have a challenge mode or a hard mode version of it to increase the difficulty even further, we want to have something that players can use to customize to their experience. Invocations are going to be a series of buffs and debuffs to bosses and players alike. Things like increasing the boss's damage, health, defense, changing around weapon styles, different types of defense values such as being weak to stab will now be weak to slash, maybe disabling spellbooks for certain players to be able to make the raid a little more different every single time, all with increased loot potential, of course. So we're hoping with this system that you're going to be able to enable as many as you feel comfortable with, to the point where you're getting rewards that you feel like you deserve. Additionally, with Invocations, we could even do things such as changing how certain fights completely play out, with either just disabling or re-enabling additional mechanics to the boss fights themselves. We're hoping with this new system, with the amount we're going to offer, it's going to be really interesting to see if players can actually complete the raid with all of these Invocations turned on, really hampering the player's ability as well as buffing all the bosses to the extreme. In the upper level of Tombs of Amascut, there's going to be 4 main paths. Each path is going to be themed after a particular avatar. Each path is going to consist of a more challenge style rune, which may be more like sepulchre style dodging or defeating enemies in unconventional ways. Once you get through that, you're going to be then faced with a boss. The boss is going to be protecting the avatar, it's going to have various mechanics, and once you defeat a boss, it's then going to change the raid in a certain way. You can defeat any of these paths in whatever order you choose. However, the order you choose matters. Once you defeat one, it's going to maybe buff or debuff the rest of the raid in some way. So there's going to be a real emphasis on choices. Once you defeat all 4 bosses of the upper level, you're going to then unlock the lower level. You're going to progress down, and you're going to be faced with 2 bosses you're going to have to fight at the same time. This is going to be a really difficult fight, but you're going to have to overcome it to drive Amascut out of the tomb. And once you do, you can then claim your prizes. With the new raids come new rewards. We're going to have a blog coming out to you shortly that's going to be detailing all the new rewards we're going to be offering for this raid. However, let's give you a bit of a sneak peek now. The first one I want to talk about is a Hecker of Tumakan. This is a new powered wand, and it's going to have an attack speed of 2 cycles. However, we're also calling it a variable attack speed weapon. It's going to attack fast 3 times in a row, then the 4th attack is going to be a much slower, powerful attack. This is going to be a very high skill weapon that's going to take a bit of getting used to, but we think it'll be really fun, and magic also needs a bit of love. The next reward we want to talk about is a new ranged armor set called the Masori armor set. This is going to be 3 pieces of equipment consisting of chest, legs, and an amulet. This is going to introduce a new status effect into the RuneScape called Low Life. Low Life is a status effect that will activate when you're on less than 40% of your maximum hit points. When you're a low life, this equipment will gain additional stats. The idea behind this armor set is to have a much more of a focus on high risk, high reward gameplay. So you're going to be really low health during this content, but you're going to be getting much more offensive capabilities whilst doing so. The amulet is going to be slightly different, where it will be a very damaging amulet, but it's also going to have an additional effect of damaging you constantly whilst you're not on low life. So this amulet is going to help you get to that 40% threshold and keep you at that threshold. The last reward I want to talk about, since I could talk about rewards all day, is the Ward of Elidness. This is going to be a new best in slot mage offhand. It's going to drop in a broken state that you're going to need to repair with an arcane sigil and some runes. This is going to be a new shield that's going to feature a stat that we've never really had on a mage offhand before, Mage Strength bonus. We're hoping that anyone who does any sort of mage combat is going to really want this item.
The Tombs of Amascut is our most narrative-focused raid yet. and no narrative is complete without a quest. Before the raid launches, you'll be able to experience the next quest in the desert storyline, Beneath Cursed Sands. In this sequel to Contact, you'll have to investigate some mysterious disappearances from the golden city of Menethos. Solve this mystery, and you'll unlock access to the raid itself. The quest is launching before the raid to give you plenty of time to prepare. So there you have it, a new quest, a new raid, and of course, some brand new rewards. We'll be sharing much more on the Tombs of Amascut very soon, but until then, thank you.
When I first heard we were doing an update in the desert, the Kharidian Desert, we're near Menethos, we're near Sophonim, my mind instantly goes to, Egypt, the history, the lore, the architecture. I think we're going to deliver content that's going to be really epic, really different to what we've seen in old school. The creative process, the start of it, how we start these big pieces of content. We get the artists, we get the developers, we get everyone in a room, and we talked about the lore, and we started to flesh out ideas. We started, talking about our favorite bits of reference, the movies, the games that inspire us, the feeling that we want the players to feel like, when they're in these, puzzles and boss rooms.
We pulled out a lot of different images, references from real life, films, TV shows, things like that, and kind of picked apart how that would be applied to things like environments, characters, and even the rewards that the players will be able to get their hands on. The lore itself is really interesting, and from an art side of things, I'm really excited to start working on some of the bosses. When looking at Egyptian themes, there's a lot of really interesting design and architecture that can be brought into old school, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that translates. The ideation phase is really important, I think, because you can start off with an idea, and once you discuss it with other people, pick apart things that probably won't work, things that could work, you might end up with something completely different that you didn't expect, but it's just so much better than what you started with. So yeah, it's a really cool process.
When it comes to the puzzle rooms, we're really pulling from a really wide range of references, specifically ideas really outside the game. We're looking at building puzzle rooms that are things that players have never done before in old school. Things that, we're getting engine changes to allow us to do these things that people aren't going to expect because it doesn't exist anywhere else in old school.
So the boss designs that we're currently working with at the moment are all really unique and interesting. It's something that's not really kind of been introduced into old school before. There's a lot of interest in shape language and a lot of interesting influences from obviously Egyptian designs. We've had some challenges presented. There have been ideas that on paper sound really cool and amazing, but when you kind of think about the engine restrictions, it would be a little bit difficult to implement it and get it into game. That being said, we're not saying no to any of the ideas just yet. We're finding creative solutions to work around these problems that we've got and find a way to actually get it into game. And I think in the long run, it'll be really cool for the players to see what kind of new things we're introducing, and it'll be a great experience for them.
We're thinking really deeply about the lore, about the story that we're telling with these boss rooms and the bosses themselves. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's we're really digging deep into those and building thematics that not only give each boss room their own special feel, gameplay and visuals, but also thematically overall the story that this whole bit of content is going to tell. Early days right now, and what we have in store. I think it's going to be, amazing. I can't wait to show people.
Okay, and now you can stop spamming about raids free. Even when we just started to stream, it was just like, come and watch it and wait and find out and wait and see. It's called marketing. It happens at the end. It's all the good stuff there. We are joined by Mod Arcane. First of all, incredible job.
It's happening! Raids 3!
It is happening! It's happening!
We're all pumped for this. This has been really, really awesome just to get to this stage, but yeah, exciting.
Raids 4, okay, alright, sure.
Slow down, please.
Look, no one does a 4. That's when you go like, Raids the Chronicles or something. Like,
Raids 360?
Yeah.
Raids 1?
Okay.
Shadow Legends.
Well, alright, questions. Lots of questions about raids naturally. There are tons of them. First, tell us, who is the raid aimed at?
The raid is generally aimed for hopefully as many players in that sort of end game category as possible. So Chambers of Xeric was a lot lower level compared to like Theatre of Blood. Theatre of Blood is very, very difficult, high barrier to entry, very punishing. Raid 3, Raid 3, Raid 3, Raid 3, Raid 3. But we're hoping with Tombs of Amascut, it's going to aim with a broader appeal than TOB, but hopefully push people further than TOB did with the invocation system. Much more of a customizable system, so hopefully people can get into it a bit easier, but then you can push it much further.
Cool. Tomb of Biscuit, awesome. I love seeing how excited people are. That's great. So you kind of touched upon it, but I'll ask the questions again. So first of all, how hard do you think this raid will be? And then how do you think it will compare to Chambers of Xeric and Theatre of Blood?
It's hard to say, since we're still very early in design. I do hope to push it further with Invocations a lot further than TOB, but because it's like a linear progression system with the whole Invocations, it should be more approachable to get into and less punishing than TOB. TOB's whole like wipe mechanic was a bit of a deterrent. And that's not going to be a strict thing that TOA is going to have. We're not just going to have the same wipe system. It's going to be sort of similar, but kind of different at the same time. What was the other question? How hard is it going to be? It's kind of subjective. Hopefully hard, hopefully difficult, but hopefully more approachable to get into than TOB.
Cool.
Awesome. So there's one big system you talked about a little bit, Invocations. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, so Invocations, instead of like TOB's got like entry mode, regular mode, and hard mode, we want to have a more linear progression system. So there's going to be maybe 30 or 40 invocations that you can all activate. You can almost think of them as some sort of modifier to the raid, and that'll actually affect the players, or it'll affect the raids and the bosses. It might just change a couple of numbers here and there. It might drastically change the fight. It might drastically change the strategies that the players actually take to the fight. And you're going to be able to enable as many or as little of these modifiers to the raid as possible. So if you want a bit more of a chill experience, we'll just not activate very many. Your loot reward potential will go down accordingly. But then if you're looking for a challenge, you can activate more and more and more of them, get more and more and more loot.
Cool. So invocations sound awesome, but I guess the question we'd like to ask is, why are we opting for that as opposed to the standard structure we've seen in Chambers of Xeric and challenge mode and Theatre of Blood and hard mode? Why are we resorting to this rather than following that?
There's a mixture. I think the first one is just more interesting. I think entry mode, normal mode, and hard mode, whilst it's okay, it's a little too linear. Our players are a much broader spectrum than just like 3 categories. So I think that linear progression system will feel a lot more rewarding, where it's like, yeah, I can beat the raid with like 1 or 2, and then 3 or 4, and then 5 or 6. You're gonna have that like inbuilt progression system for the players themselves. And it lets us have a much more wider appeal. Like we really want to have raids that push players to their limits, but then TOB kind of proved like you can't just raise like the end barrier as well as the minimum barrier higher and higher and higher, because then it just eliminates so many players from actually being able to access the raid at all. So we're hoping this like just widens it, where it increases the upper end but also lowers the lower end as well, and hopefully reward people appropriately.
Cool.
Awesome. So with these invocations, obviously you mentioned that the loot potential will increase the more you've got on. Could players just like min-max it, optimize it, find the right set of invocations and stick for that forever, and you don't end up with that goal of like modified experience each time?
I fully expect that to happen. Like without any RNG, players will always figure out the most efficient ways to do anything, and that's just kind of how our game goes. And having the RNG in there can fix that, but it can also make it kind of frustrating at the same time. Like RNG has to be placed carefully. So we do expect that after a long period of time, with enough invocations and enough playtesting and enough players just throwing themselves at this content, because our player base is really smart now compared to like 3 or 4 years ago. It's actually kind of crazy. They'll just do whatever we release. Enough time, the optimal methods will be figured out, and that'll be okay. But the optimal methods might still be difficult. So the optimal method for efficient points per hour in Chambers of Xeric is like 7 + 3, or like 4 + 3 or something. But not every player does that, right? Some players are still going to have 0 invocations on in TOA just to like learn the mechanics, get into it, slowly have that progression. And once they get good enough, maybe they will switch to the like optimal setup. But I think that'll take quite a while for most players to get to that comfortable point. But yeah, I fully expect that people will have that optimal setup, but I also fully expect people, like, even if it's like, oh, maybe 24 out of 30 invocations activated for the optimal points per hour or whatever, some players will still want to push for 30 out of 30, just because of the challenge, the thrill. It might be fun with your friends, right? Have a clan with eight people together doing the raid, or you have as many on as possible and it's just chaos. It'd be fun in itself.
Cool, so it's probably quite easy to forget that there wasn't just a raid announced, there was also a quest as well, Beneath Cursed Sands. So this quest, will completing it be a requirement to play the raid?
Completing Beneath Cursed Sands will be a requirement to play the raid, yeah. We're planning to release it a bit sooner than the raid itself, so you'll have time to actually do the quest and carry on from there. I believe the requirements is Contact, really popular quest that all of our players love, as well as I think it's 62 agility, 55 fire making, 55 smithing, so fairly low requirements apart from Contact if you really just don't want to do that quest. But you should get a Questcape anyway, because Questcape's fun.
So yeah, or fun but useful, especially certainly useful.
And the other big topic, rewards. And you talked a little bit about rewards in the video. The ranged armor is trying something quite new with the low life status. So you can talk a little bit about where that idea came from.
So I played Path of Exile quite a lot, and they do a lot with low life, and they've supported it in a lot of different ways. And I just thought it was quite an interesting system, and I think like high risk, high reward gameplay, most players generally like that concept, and I'm interested in trying it in old school. And I'm interested to see what the players think about that as well. If that sounds like something that'd be fun to try and play, or do we just want another armor set with just higher stats than Armadillo, and we can just go with that? Again, all these rewards are up in the air. There's going to be a poll and a blog and all that stuff, and there'll be a beta for you guys to play it and try it out. If you don't like it, we can go a different route. This is just the current proposal. We're like, this is an interesting idea. We've not tried it before. Maybe this is the stuff that you want. I think it'd be really interesting, like seeing really good players doing like Inferno with just 40 health the entire time, just to get the maximum DPS possible. I think that'd be really interesting, really exciting. 40 health is like a really nice threshold where like generally nothing really hits you for unavoidable 40 damage, so you can survive it if you play well. So I think it should work pretty well, to be honest.
Personally, something I really like is how we're adding more creative styles of reward. There's more diversity to what's on offer in terms of what players can use and choose to do. And that kind of brings me on to the next question I had, which is power creep. It's pretty hard to avoid with new PVM rewards. People always want something new. People always want something that's going to be valuable. How far do you feel we're pushing that boundary right now with the rewards that we're offering here?
It's hard to quantify, but power creep's inevitable to a certain degree. It just needs to be done well. It needs to be done carefully. It needs to feel appropriate from the content it comes from, and it needs to feel like it's not just overshadowing old content. I'd like to think that this fits this category, where it's coming from really high-end gameplay, it requires a lot of investment, where in this case it's like the life pool, it's going to be 2 or 3 items to actually achieve this additional damage. So hopefully it feels appropriate. Obviously if we get feedback saying like, no, this is blatant power creep, tone it down, that was fine, we'll rethink it. But yeah, it's a very careful thing that we need to consider, and I think we've done an okay job of this so far.
Cool, so let's go to some chat questions. First question we've got is from Kiwi. They ask, is it designed to scale down to 1 to make it soloable without greater difficulty?
Yeah, so we're not going to be designing the raid with solo particularly in mind, but we do really want to make sure it is soloable. So TOB had the problem where it was just 3 to 5 pretty much, but 5 felt a bit too chaotic, especially if you're getting into it. 3 was very punishing, because if one player died and you only had 2, 2 was really awkward. So most people opted for 4 until you got really comfortable, then you like went back down to 3 for better money. And that's kind of lame, because 3 people's like very specific. There's no flexibility there. If there's just 2 of you, don't really want to do TOB. Like if there's like 5 of you, you don't really want to do it. If there's a 6th person, you just have to sit by the sidelines and see you later. It's not great. That's what Chambers of Zerg was really good for, like 1 to 100. It's any flexibility. Your extra friend wants to come along, great. So 1 to 8 hopefully gives enough flexibility where you feel like you can have a large portion of your friends come with you, as well as like you don't need them to be online to do the content. Not saying solos is going to be efficient. Might be worse points per hour, but it'd be more efficient than bank standing waiting for your 2nd person to log in. So hopefully that'd be good.
Let's be honest, we all know it, and the chat all knows it. Wook's just going to solo it in 3 months with all Invocations on.
Yeah, and then we might have to add some more Invocations, and that's fine.
So Feraik is asking, will we be able to dismantle our current arcane shields to get our sigils back?
Yeah, so that's a big question where you're attaching this arcane sigil to the Warden of Validness to combine it, to reactivate it and make it an equipable shield. Currently, your arcane shields, like you can't combine the shield, you have to combine the sigil. So we've introduced a feature on, I think, Abbot Langley to basically revert that process. Destroys the Blessed Spirit shield, but you'll get the sigil back. So then you can reattach it to the Warden of Validness.
Cool, so the new quest, Beneath Cursed Sands, what difficulty is it going to be?
I can't remember the actual categorization for it. I assume it's like intermediate, but it won't be a crazy difficult quest. I think the recommended combat level is 80, so really low level, but you want a few combat stats. There will be some fighting in it.
Cool. I think our feeling on it was, if you're somebody who's going to be wanting to do raids free, you'll probably be fine doing the quest.
Yeah.
So the next question, you kind of touched on it a little bit. Like, what team size is Raids 3 aimed at?
1 to 8 currently, so a bit higher than TOB, but we also want to promote the flexibility. Like TOB is technically 1 to 5, but realistically it's like 3 to 4, then kind of 5, kind of 2, and kind of 1. But yeah, we're hoping that 1 to 8 will all feel relatively viable for a TOA.
Awesome.
Cool. Still plenty more questions from the chat coming. So Red Zeppa asks, will Raids 3 be a safe death?
It won't be a safe death for Hardcore Iron Man. If you die in there, you'll lose your status, similar to TOB. It'll have a different death system than TOB though. We're not going to go with strict wipe mechanic for TOB. We're experimenting with some like soft wipe mechanic, maybe like 3 wipes or maybe a certain amount of wipes per boss. We're still experimenting with that, but we do expect to have a slightly different death system altogether.
Cool.
I got a question from Mobile Viewer about what length of time does the team anticipate each room taking? And I imagine that might be quite hard to answer right now, but maybe you got an idea of the length for the full raid?
I think we're currently aiming like 35 to 45, but it's so hard to estimate because our players will just find some weird method of killing everything like twice as fast. So that's the goal at least.
Okay, so the next question is from N. Sandon, and they ask, are there going to be any desert-related rewards because it's based in the desert?
There are some rewards. I mean, all the rewards are sort of themed on either the raid or the lore within the raid itself. So the Hacker of Tumican, it's related to like a god or an avatar within the raid itself. There's a Kopesh. Is that how you pronounce it? Kopesh? Kopesh? The weird curved, like pointy sword. So yeah, we've got some desert themed weapons and rewards.
How about a scroll you can read and it makes you immune from desert heat forever?
That sounds a bit too OP, sorry.
Fair enough. Don't want to be too much power creep. A Lemonade NT is asking, will the amulet effect be active even when not in the set? Will you be able to use it to lower your life for Darox and potentially other low life effects?
So it will lower your life as long as you are not affected by low life. So if you're above 40% health, it will damage you. The certain like numbers are still to debate in terms of like how fast it will get you lower. I still imagine like a rock cake or a locator orb will get you lower faster, but we didn't want people to feel like they had to use a locator orb in PVM to make this armor set worth it. So the amulet's like this thing where it'll like try and keep you at that 40% threshold quite easily with them, quite passively. So you don't need to actively think about it too much.
Cool, so we're going to take 3 more questions from the chat before we look to move on and wrap up. But naturally, there are so many questions related to Raid that we will look to cover very soon in upcoming streams. So a guy named Spar asks, will we be able to swap weapons to reset the attack progression of the new one? Because obviously you mentioned every 4th hit, it does the slower, more powerful attack. Could you just swap out and then swap back if you want to carry on the quicker hits?
Currently how it's implemented, you could attack, say, twice with the wand, and then you could maybe equip a Sang, attack once, and then you could equip the wand again, attack, and then big attack.
Okay.
So you could swap out. Up to feedback on that if people think that's a good thing. I currently think it's a cool thing right now, so you have a lot more flexibility. Like I'm imagining in like hard mode Niluk's room, like imagine that you attack like 2 mini mage crabs, and then you, or 3 mini mage crabs, and then you maybe Sang the big like demi-boss, the Princupus that spawns, and then you do the big attack from the Heka, which has got a longer attack delay after it. So that'd be like a cool way of getting optimal DPS out of that, and I'd rather players have that like flexibility, because I think that'd be a lot more interesting.
I quite like the idea of being able to stack up that and queue up that big hit just to whenever you want to like unleash it.
Exactly.
Sounds cool.
+1 is asking, will there be any skilling related parts to Raids 3, similar to James' Eric, or is it going to be mostly a strictly combat based experience?
Currently, based on the challenge or the path designs that we're talking about, there isn't like strict skilling, but there'll be like sort of skilling elements, like you might use a pickaxe here or there, and there'll be more like an agility focus, like more sepulchre style dodging or movement. So more so than TOB, probably less so than Chambers, if you want a rough ballpark.
Cool, and the final chat question, and what a one to end on, is from Zeldin OSRS. Can they ask, will there be a skeleton boss called Indiana Bones?
We might have to defer to Ed on that one. He'll pick the names.
Because it's such deep lore and he is the lore man?
Yeah, exactly.
That's why. Okay.
Defer all those responsibilities onto him.